I grew up in Southern California and have been working my way north, as I put it, and lived in Visalia for several years, in the Bay Area a couple of years, and then moved to Citrus Heights in 1990.
Oh, okay. What brought you here to Citrus Heights?
Well, work brought us to the Sacramento region, and we had lived in Visalia. And my husband said, well, Visalia is very flat. So my husband said, I'd like to live somewhere where there's some topography. And so as we were looking for a house, the house that we liked the best was in Citrus Heights. And it's a Strang Brothers home, and it's on a hill. Again, we'd moved to Citrus Heights from Visalia, which was a smaller community where everywhere you went you ran into people you knew, and I came here and I was searching for a sense of community, and I think that was something that was lacking at that point. And about a year later I learned that there was an incorporation movement underway. Bill Van Duker and others organized a big community meeting, and my husband and I went to that, learned about it, and I ended up becoming involved with the process after that meeting. Based on my, again, search for a better sense of community, and also the fact that I had background in the incorporation process through previous employment I had. Well, when I spoke to the people who were involved in it at that point, after that meeting, and they learned about my background, I was invited to be on the board of directors of CHIP, and eventually, when Doug Ossie was the president and he was looking to recruit someone to take his place, he asked me if I would take on that role and be the final president of the Citrus Heights Incorporation Project in 1993. Now, again, unlike many of the people involved, the Duncans, the Van Dukers, Doug Ossie, Jeannie Bruins, who had been through the entire process, the entire 12-year process that started back in 1984, they had many more long years of involvement in the process. I came in the early 1990s when a lot of the groundwork had already been done. So my job, along with others, was to get it across the finish line. It did, but then there were stops and starts, and that's why when I first moved here, I didn't even know there was an incorporation project, because it was in the litigation phase at that time, and really nothing going on as far as the community involvement. Well, again, I did not form it. That was formed before I was here, but it was the Citrus Heights Incorporation Project, or CHIP, and it was local people who, many of them longtime residents, who saw the need for the city to be independent of the county government and to be able to accomplish things that to be able to get things done that were lacking under the county government. I have to say, and I say this as a former now member of the Board of Supervisors, but at the time, back in the 1980s and the early 1990s, the county really was not paying attention to its unincorporated communities. And Citrus Heights is a much better community now than it was then, both physically, in terms of the physical appearance, and also in terms of local government. Well, I had worked for city government, and I knew that with its own local government, with its own elected representatives, that and its own revenue sources, that Citrus Heights could really improve itself. And I think that's proven to be true. I just knew the power of local government and having your own local representatives to get things done and to really listen to the people in the community. And I know that there were two big issues that really impelled incorporation. The first was making land use decisions, but then by the time the city incorporated, those had largely been made and the city was pretty well built out. But the second one was the desire for more local law enforcement. And by incorporating and forming its own police department, the city had the ability to have a much stronger law enforcement presence that stayed in Citrus Heights. It was just finishing up the litigation initiated by the county and several social service agencies that were blocking the incorporation process. And then it got to the point where it got to the point where CHIP could move forward through LAFCO with the actual incorporation process, which involves preparing an environmental document and going through a series of hearings at LAFCO and preparation of city formation documents, and then finally going to a vote of the people. It was just starting up again, but it still had a long way to go because the county continued to obstruct the process as much as possible. There was a decision from the court that there needed to be an environmental impact report prepared. That had a cost. The LAFCO hearing process had a cost. And then the challenge was to raise the money to cover that cost so that it could go finally on the ballot. And over the years and long before my involvement, there had been numerous fundraising activities. The Citrus Heights Chamber of Commerce helped, but we still got to the end of the process and we were $30,000 short. And we literally had days to come up with that. So we were all feeling pretty defeated at that point. And then it was Gene Duncan who had the idea to send out a fax. That's what was the technology 20 years ago. Send out a fax to all the Citrus Heights Chamber of Commerce members, and lo and behold, it was the Citrus Heights Water District who decided to contribute that $30,000 on literally the last day because they believed with a city that the Citrus Heights Water District would also be in a better position. And so it was a really last moment, very exciting event to be able to deliver that $30,000 check downtown to everyone's surprise and be able to move forward then to the ballot. Well, I think the county was very surprised because it was just assumed, I think, that we wouldn't be able to come up with the money. And I said we were all feeling pretty defeated until the last few days. And
that's pretty dramatic.
It was a dramatic ending to a lengthy 12-year process and a tough slug for a lot of people. Well, then of course, it had to go on the ballot, and fortunately for Citrus Heights and our residents, there was no organized opposition at that point any longer to the incorporation, because in an incorporation vote, if there's organized opposition, it's probably going to fail. But at the same time, this had been going on so long, there was a campaign in favor of it that was led by Bill Van Duker and Jeannie Bruins. They didn't raise a lot of money. They were able to put lawn signs out. There wasn't money to do polling and those kinds of things that you do in most campaigns, so no one really knew what the outcome of the election was going to be, and we were pleasantly surprised that it received, I believe, about 63% of the vote. Taking the lead and speaking at the hearings in front of LAFCO, we had to make some decisions, such as were we going to have council members who ran at large, in other words, citywide, or were there going to be districts? LAFCO recommended there be districts. I argued that there should not be, because I couldn't think of how you would divide Citrus Heights up into 5 districts, or of any group that would lack representation by not having districts. And I thought it would be better to have a council that represents all the residents of the city than just parts of the city. And so there were things to be argued, there were terms to be agreed to, and just a lot of process.
Okay. Now, was this before the vote?
This was before the vote.
Okay, so you were already starting to see how the city...
Yes, LAFCO, one of the things they do is lay out what they call terms and conditions, and we had to agree to these. However, we were just private citizens. I mean, we weren't representing anyone, but that's just the way it works. And so later on, the elected city council learned that not all of those terms and conditions were favorable to the new city. So that was the next step.
What kind of terms and conditions that weren't?
Well, the biggest one is the revenue neutrality agreement. And at the time when we were CHIP and we were private citizens, and we weren't experts in municipal finance, and the terms of the revenue neutrality agreement, as it turned out, would have made it very difficult for the new city to move forward. So after the incorporation was approved and the voters elected 5 city council members, and I was one of those 5, and then ultimately we had some staff who had that expertise. At that point, we realized that there were, in our minds, errors made, or the financial projections were not accurate, and they were not favorable to the new city. And that was when the city council made the decision not to make that first revenue neutrality payment, at which point, of course, we were sued by the county and ultimately reached a settlement, which is in place still today, that limited or reduced the amount of those annual payments. And now it's only about another 5 more years, I think, till those payments end. And then the city will be in an even better financial position than it is today. Well, it improved the revenue to the city. It limited it at the very beginning of the 25-year period of those payments. I believe the initial payment was going to be over $5 million a year, if I remember correctly. And the negotiated settlement was that the payment would be the amount that the city would normally receive as property tax revenues, which at the time was a little more than $2 million a year. So it reduced the payment that first year by over $3 million.
More than cut it in half.
Yes. Now, it is, so the city, until this 25 years is up, continues to to pay all of its property tax revenue to the county. So the amount has fluctuated over the years, but up and down as property values have gone up and down, but it's still saved the city millions of dollars over that 25 years. Well, that was a very interesting experience and one that not many people get to have. The 5 of us that were elected to the first city council, we didn't really know each other very well, but we rapidly got to spend a lot of time together, and we really bonded as a city council. The 2 of the members are no longer with us, but the other 2, we remain good friends to this day. We knew that we had a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time. We only gave ourselves 2 months to get the city up and running, the time from the election till the time we were sworn in, but we started meeting even before we were sworn in, and those meetings were open to the public. We hired an interim city manager, we hired an interim city attorney, we had to find a physical space. We had no money. So I like to say, when you form a new city, you start out, you have no staff, you have no building, and you have no money. And so you have to address all of those 3 things in a short amount of time. But we had, the interim city attorney is still the city attorney today, Ruth Ann Ziegler. She knew that we would, within a relatively short period of time, have revenue coming in. So she and her firm were willing to put in the time and wait to get paid. And the same thing for Mike Oliver, our interim city manager. And the Chamber of Commerce graciously offered office space for the city manager to work in. I'd like to refer to it as a broom closet. He started out in a broom closet using his personal credit card, and we got an initial line of credit from River City Bank. And until sales tax and other revenues started coming in, I remember driving around with a box of resumes in the trunk of my car from people who wanted to work for the city, getting phone calls from the franchise tax board wanting to know where to send the sales tax revenue, and dealing with these things. And the other new council members were doing similar things, and we just we got it done. We met probably at least twice a week for about the first year and a half. I think it was very intense. And doing things like interviewing city manager candidates in the back of the fire station on the night before Christmas Eve. And I also want to recognize the Sunrise Recreation and Park District for giving us a place to hold our council meetings before we had our first council chambers. And they didn't charge the city for that. We made some improvements to their building at Rush Park, but so we've had a great relationship with them ever since.
So you had a lot of support from local organizations?
Yes, the Water District, the Park District, the Chamber of Commerce. We did. And now we're on our second city hall, and the city has a police station and a community center, and it's just amazing all of the accomplishments in the last 20 years, and without going into debt. Well, more than a little. It's even that there was a lawsuit involved.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, again, I was not here for a lot of that. So actually I came in and was able to speak with people at the county without having that baggage, essentially. So I didn't live through all those tough years of that. So others such as Bill Van Duker and Jeannie Bruins and Jean and Jack Duncan can really speak to that better than I can.
So you were like the fresh blood that you needed to see them through to the
Well,
finish line.
I can't take credit for all the work that they did for all those long years. Other than the lawsuit over the revenue neutrality payments, once we had that behind us, I think the city and the county have, the relationship is very cordial. It's better than it is with some cities. The Citrus Heights, for some reason, has very few issues that involve the county. Part of that may be that Citrus Heights is surrounded by other communities and also by Placer County, so it doesn't have large tracts of land to be developed, and so there really are very few issues between the city of Citrus Heights and the county. I did. After serving 2 terms on the city council, the seat on the Board of Supervisors, that includes Citrus Heights, came open when Roger Nilo moved on to the State Assembly. So I chose to run for that office and was elected. And so I continued to represent Citrus Heights for another 12 years on the Board of Supervisors, along with the City of Folsom and 5 unincorporated communities. And I will say, of the communities I represented, really Citrus Heights had the fewest issues for my office to address. Part of it is because it's a very well-run city. So is Folsom, of course, but the city's well-run, and it just doesn't, I don't know how to articulate it really. It just
Takes care of itself.
It pretty much takes care of itself, and there aren't boundary issues or development issues or other financial issues, that very few. Well, you have to, because you're representing other communities in addition to Citrus Heights, but also counties have different responsibilities than cities do, because the counties are responsible for health and human services, which cities don't have to address, the criminal justice system. The county operates, provides water service to some communities. It runs the airport system. It just has a lot of other responsibilities in addition to what city government entails. Well, again, because it allows the local residents more local control, and specifically back to the issue that first drove incorporation, which is law enforcement. Now, the city contracted with the county for several years with the Sheriff's Department, but ultimately made the decision after I had left the council to form its own police department. So now has its own police chief, can set the budget and determine how the size of the department, and just have a greater law enforcement presence than it had before. No, I mean, I thought incorporation would be good for the city, and that it has been. I think it's been a huge success, and I think you can tell that by just looking around to see the improvements that have been made to Sunrise Boulevard, to Auburn Boulevard, to Greenback Lane. Having your own economic development department allows you to focus just on your own community and not the entire region. I've worked in local government, been involved in local government my whole career, and I believe in local government because it's the closest to the people. You're, as an elected, whether you're a city council member or a county supervisor, you're completely accessible, and the residents have a greater impact on what happens to them. Well, I think I've touched on those. The dramatic ending to the getting the last minute funding that was needed to bring the incorporation to the ballot. The intense process involved of starting up the city, but the 5 of us all knew we had a job to do, and we worked together and got it done. And then to look around today, and I mean, it's not just about buildings, but it's about building a community. And I just think that back in the 80s and that Citrus Heights was not a destination, and now it is. And the groundbreaking next week for the new medical center, which will bring some high-paying jobs and more economic development to the city, is a great example of that. And you know, one thing, not every community can become a city because you have to have a tax base. Citrus Heights has a tax base. Originally it was with the mall, but malls are undergoing pressures of their own. The economy's changing, people's shopping habits are changing. It's still a great asset to Citrus Heights, but they need to diversify the economic base, and the new medical center is a great example of that. No, but you can't become a city without one. You have to, and that's why there are some communities in the county that might be interested in incorporation, but it's not realistic for them to pursue that because they don't have enough of a tax base. I'm really proud to have been to have played a part in this, and I was proud to be on the first city council and then later to represent Citrus Heights at the county level. They had never had a county supervisor who came from Citrus Heights. Now they have a second one.
Right. Do you think, does that help to have somebody from?
Well, I think it doesn't hurt. The more familiar the person is and with a community, I think it's serves the city well. And this came out of the when Citrus Heights was still in the incorporation process. Sacramento County was successful in getting the state legislature to pass a bill, and the governor at the time to sign it, that we required city incorporations to be, quote, revenue neutral, which meant that, oh, see, this is where it gets arcane, which being revenue neutral means that the county, at the end of the day, there should be a balance between the revenue that the county loses and the revenue they gain, so that when a city is formed, the county doesn't lose money. When a community goes through an incorporation process and gets to the point where LAFCO does these reports, they do a report that shows the money the county will save by the services they no longer have to provide to the residents, and the money that they will lose from the tax revenue that will go to the new city. And in theory, that's supposed to balance and be revenue neutral. And then they do a calculation of what the new city, if it's formed, will have to pay or reimburse the county in order for that to be revenue neutral. So that was done, and that was in the terms and conditions that were on the ballot measure. So it was not just an agreement between some private citizens, but it was also, in a sense, ratified by the voters who voted on the incorporation. But after that was all done, and the first city council actually had staff on board that were experts in municipal finance, they discovered that the calculations that were done by LAFCO were not accurate forecasts. And so based on that, the first city council decided not to make that first revenue neutrality payment to the county because they felt it was too high. And at that point, then the county sued the new city, and in the end, there was a settlement agreement where the settlement was more favorable to the city than the original terms and conditions, because that was in the terms and conditions. The original terms and conditions was that it be a 25-year period. I can't explain, since I wasn't the author of that bill, I can't explain that.
Yeah. But it's nice in the city's favor, though.
It is. I mean, at the beginning, 25 years seemed a long way out, and now it's just a few years away. Oh, sure. They're always, and I think the county was surprised, first that it was approved, and secondly with maybe how well the city has done. And Citrus Heights then was just the first in a series of 3 incorporations that took place in relatively quick succession, because Citrus Heights was followed by Elk Grove, which was followed by Rancho Cordova. And so in a matter of less than 10 years, this county went from having 4 cities to 7 cities, and that was just a sea change in this county and the way that it's governed.
Okay. Does that hurt the county at all? Or?
Well, when the revenue neutrality payments end, it will definitely affect the county budget, but the county's had a long time to plan for this. Well, I had to believe that, or I wouldn't have put in the time I did along with others working on it. Yes, and again, I give a lot of credit to the people who did the whole 12 years. My involvement was not that lengthy, but that's a long time to work at something. Right now I'm reading the book about Alexander Hamilton and the Revolutionary War and the creating the new government for a new country, and kind of relating back to that. I mean, yes, that was for a whole country, but you still go through kind of the same process, and the struggle that they had, that our founding fathers had forming this country, and they had their lives and their fortunes at stake, a lot more than those of us working on Citrus Heights. But there are some similarities too. Having the ability to focus just on Citrus Heights, and again, the county, I said earlier, I think at that time the county was not paying a lot of attention to its unincorporated communities. I would say that's changed today, but the ability to put in place the level of law enforcement services that we wanted to see in Citrus Heights. I remember the day, even though it was a contract with the Sheriff's Department, we had cars that were painted Citrus Heights Police Department, and the first day they rolled out, and I believe it was July 1st of 1997, people waving at them, honking at them, seeing them for the first time, seeing that something tangible, and the work that was done to improve Sunrise Boulevard early on, and we have to credit former Congressman Doug Osee with helping to secure funding both for that and assisting us with getting, this was back under the Clinton administration, and they started the COPS grant program, and getting 90% funding for the city's new police department for a few years really helped to kickstart this community. Well, I would not say that I was the one. I was the president at the time of the group that brought it home. And it was not any one person, but just happened to be the right combinations of people, both people who had lived in the community a long time and made many contributions over the years to the community, and the people who started the process and saw it through to the end. And we were a team. On the ballot in November 1996 was not only the yes or no on incorporation, but the slate of people running for the first city council. And you're running for an office that may not exist, and that's actually happened in other communities. It's an interesting process. There are 5 open seats, 12 people ran that year. With my involvement in the incorporation process, I chose to run because I decided I wasn't quite done yet. I would like to be a part of the city council that actually implement the incorporation if it were successful. Choosing to run for office is a big decision. I had, as I have through the last 20 years, my husband's full support. While I knew I might not get elected, I at least knew if I hadn't run that I would have regretted it. And the interesting thing about running for a first city council is, again, with 12 people running, none of us were running against each other. We were all pro-incorporation, so as we were out there campaigning, we were also campaigning for incorporation. And no one was attacking each other in any forums or any literature or anything like that. We all wanted the city to succeed, and it was just a matter of which were the top 5 that the voters chose. But no other election will ever be like that. Well, what was interesting, it was 20 years ago, there were not the number of vote-by-mail voters that there are today. So you pretty much always knew the results on election night. And by the time the polls closed, I knew there was nothing more I could do at that point. So my husband and I went out to dinner, and then we headed to the Citrus Heights Chamber office where they were putting up the results. That was before you had just looked it up on the internet too. So you had to periodically phone the elections office and get the results. So by the time I got there, they had up the earlier results, and my name was second. So I was pleasantly surprised, and and then also, of course, the incorporation was leading as well, and the results pretty much held the same all night long, and we knew the results before we went to bed. It isn't like that anymore. You have to, generally now with all the vote-by-mail voters and the fact that people can mail their ballots on election day, you generally have to wait to get results. So I'm thankful that we were able to celebrate that evening. And then the city actually became incorporated. It was effective at a minute after midnight on January 1st of 1997. So that was the best New Year's Eve of my life. Not generally my favorite holiday, but that was a New Year's Eve where staying up till midnight, and then being awake to know the moment that the city became a city, that was pretty exciting. But that evening, earlier in the evening, there was some event, and then I can't really recall, but after that I had some of the people who'd been involved in the incorporation invited them over to my home after that, and we stayed up till midnight because it was worth staying up for, to be awake the moment that Citrus Heights became a city.
And you were a city council person?
And, well, I would be sworn in. We were sworn in on January 2nd, because January 1st was a holiday. So. And Dave Cox, who was our county supervisor at the time, swore us in. It was raining. It was one of those big rainstorms, and he swore us in, and then he was headed somewhere else in his district, and then someone discovered that he hadn't signed the papers that swore us in, so his chief of staff had to get him on his cell phone, and which fortunately those were still around, those were in use at the time, and get him back to sign the papers so that we'd be official, and it was exciting. And, well, again, after the excitement, then we knew we just had to, and we had been meeting for the 2 months between the election and being sworn in. We were not official, but there were certain things that had to be done. And then we had to, I think then when we had our very first city council meeting after we were sworn in, we had to then go back and vote on all of those things.
Oh, so you'd already kind of got things in
Yeah,
place.
well, again, we had the interim city manager, the interim city attorney, and the county actually had to provide services to us for the first 6 months until we could get our own team in place, which we had made the decision to contract out for most services. And over the years, the city has taken most of those services in-house, but to start out with, I mean, it's hard to hire that many people, and we wanted to keep the city government small and efficient and flexible. I thought of one person who I hadn't mentioned, who no longer lives in the community, lives in Southern California now, but Jean Lauren also was very much involved in the incorporation, and because she doesn't live here anymore, I think her name probably hasn't come up as much, but she deserves a lot of credit as well.
And what did she do?
Well, again, she was part of this group that worked hard on the incorporation process. And she had a business here in Citrus Heights and was involved in the chamber. And so she was here for the opening of the community center. And so hopefully she'll be able to get up sometime this year for the different celebrations. Oh gosh, there were many people have now passed away, and of course, I mean, Bill Hughes, our first mayor, who passed away suddenly in 2003, and Alma Kenyon, who served on the first city council for 2 years, and she subsequently passed away as well. So, but she was a long time involved in the incorporation project. We had a great, I'll add this. Our first city council, we were a great combination of knowledge. Bill Hughes was a police lieutenant in Roseville, so he knew law enforcement. Tim Rainey and I we're planners by background, so we had a lot of knowledge about municipal government. And Alma Kenyon had been involved for so long in the community with youth sports and women's groups and the incorporation project, and James Shelby, who is the president of the Urban League. And so we really complemented each other in our areas of expertise, and so we had we were just a good combination for that first city council.